It's always a pleasure to speak to you because you speak in depth about these matters. Now, one of your recent opinion editorial in the East African says that the the AFCFTA could be a game changer for EAC and the trade in the region. What do you base this on?
Well, if I may just start, actually, your opening remarks there, I have to have a different opinion to. You were talking about delays in the process of moving forward with the AFCFTA. The agreement was only signed in March, of course, and as you know, 49 countries signed up. Now, that's a remarkable consensus across the African continent. Now, it's true we need to move forward with the stage of ratification. And we're doing our best now to discuss with member states across our region, and that's why we have this meeting partly as well, to discuss with them, you know, to build a consensus about moving forward towards ratification. Currently, we have 2 countries in our region which have ratified, Kenya and Rwanda, and we understand that Uganda is in the process of ratifying as well, so that will take us to 3. We're optimistic about this. We have a year basically to reach those 22 ratifications, so the African Continental Free Trade Area can actually be put into operation. But I would say things are going pretty well actually in terms of the negotiations. You know, I'm optimistic that we're going to reach that target of 22. Just a few weeks ago, we held a meeting in Lagos. Discussing the case of Nigeria, for example. And the Nigerian officials present and the Vice President himself actually made very clear that they have no objections. They've always been very supportive of these Pan-African integration projects. It's simply that they need this process of time for consultation to allay fears.
But how much longer do they need to consult on this?
Well, my understanding is that subsequent to our meeting, that they're fairly close to also coming to agreement about moving forward with the AFCFTA. So they didn't have strong objections, but they do have certain sectors, for example, where there's some concerns. You tend to find that the concerns are around fears of transshipment of goods, for example, which don't originally originate in Africa, but are actually taking advantage of the liberalisation under the AFCFTA. Transshipment fears are common in the East Africa community as well. Of all the cases, for example, that we have of non-tariff barriers in the EAC, it seems the most predominant complaints are about rules of origin. Where
do the products origin from?
Yeah, exactly. This is one of the fears, and you can understand that that's a reasonable concern. But we're fairly optimistic that we're going to get to those 22 countries.
Andrew, of course, when we look at it right now, the trade deficits, when you look at East African nations, much of it is driven by the imports that we get from countries mainly out of the East African community and mostly out of Africa. China and the UK and the US, of course, coming in handy here with how much they export to the region. Tell me, with the AFCFTA looking forward to be implemented, I mean, we have a year to go for the ratification. Tell me, how much does this stand to benefit business people and countries in the east of the continent?
Right. Yes, you're quite right. I mean, the region, East Africa region, has large deficits. Trade deficits. Of the 14 countries in our sub-region, actually there's only 1 country with a positive merchandise trade balance, and that's actually DRC because of its mineral wealth. All the other countries have deficits, and some of those deficits are really quite large ones. What is the components of that? It's mostly manufactured goods, and it's mostly coming from outside of Africa. Our argument about the AFCFTA is principally that it will give a boost to intra-African trade in manufactured and processed foods, for example. And the estimates that we have are very large in terms of the potential boost there from liberalising trade amongst Africans. So we would source more from within the continent, and that should ultimately help improve our trade balance with the rest of the world.
Do you see this actually coming in to replace the preferential markets that you, on the other hand, say that did not necessarily play its role because of the permanence, the impermanence, as you mentioned? Do you see this playing a major role than what you called maybe have sought for in the AGOA?
Yes, I mean, I think my basic point about this has been historically we've had preferential market access since the 1970s to high-income markets, for example, to the United States and to Europe. And we also actually have preferential market access now to India and China. They also have schemes for LDC countries in terms of access. And yet we haven't seen a strong supply-side response on the export side. Now, there's a lot of reasons for that. But underlying it, in some cases, is the impermanence of them. So, for example, the AGOA agreement has, on occasions, been suspended, or there's been threat of suspension. That doesn't help. Everything but arms for the European Union is a more permanent basis, but there are other issues there related to phytosanitary standards, for example, rules of origin. Those kind of issues, I think, ultimately have undermined the usefulness of those agreements for African countries. And the African Continental Free Trade Area is very different because it's not preferential. It's actually reciprocal market access. And we feel that will help build up capacities in industry and food processing very significantly.
So from where you stand, you believe that in a year's time, we would have the AFCFTA signed and ratified and implemented?
Well, it's going to be implemented in stages, quite clearly. I mean, I think we have to be realistic about the timelines for these things. I often comment on the parallel example of the European single market, which was signed, I believe, in 1986, but wasn't actually implemented until 1993. Yeah. Okay, that's a considerable period of time there where countries were carrying out their consultations, their studies about which sectors would be benefiting, which ones would be negatively affected. And I think the single market programme for the European Union was a very positive step forward for the European Union. And I would make the same argument for the African Continental Free Trade Area. So one thing is to reach that critical level of ratifications, the 22, start implementing, but the process will take time across a whole continent, of course. You know, this is more complex in the sense that we're 55 countries, compared to the 15 countries which entered into the single market program of the European Union. So clearly there's a level of complexity there. But we feel that the benefits will start to materialize once things are implemented.
All right, Andrew. I can end this without saying that good luck at the 22nd meeting of the Intergovernmental Committee of Experts on Sub-Saharan Africa. Of course, the regional office that you're hosting next week at the Kigali Convention Center.
Yeah, we expect starting on the 20th, yes, next Tuesday. Yeah.
Definitely. We expect to see more talk on regional trade and intra-African trade itself. So, yeah, good luck with that.
Thank you.